Hello and welcome to Foreigndesk on Benue Television. I am Susan Ayo. The headlines. Ethiopian Prime Minister seeks end to conflicts between Sudan's military and rapid support forces. Russia promises to release Indians fighting in its army. Plus, Israeli military strikes Hezbollah site deep inside Lebanese territory. Now the news in details. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has made Sudan's Armed Forces Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan as regional and world powers seek an end to the conflict between the military and paramilitary Rapid Support Forces (RSF). Sudan has been racked by war since April 2023, when fighting erupted between the forces loyal to al-Burhan and the RSF led by his former deputy Mohamed Dagalo. Ahmed's visit to the Red Sea coastal town of Port Sudan, where the army-aligned government is based, is the highest-level state visit since the start of the conflict, which has threatened to destabilize the region, displace millions of people, and created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Sudan's Sovereign Council, in a statement, said that the meeting was a testament to the depth of relations between the two countries. The council said that the al-Burhans briefed Ahmed on what he called the crimes and atrocities committed by the RSF as part of its rebellions against the state and its institutions. Both sides have been accused of committing war crimes by United Nations officials and international rights groups. Observers about al-Burhan's camp has largely shunned East African mediation attempts to end the war, accusing regional leaders of siding with RSF. The United Nations Refugee Agency said as an estimated 10 million people have been forcibly displaced in Sudan since the war broke out, while about 7.7 billion people are displaced internally. More than 2 million have fled to neighboring countries. According to Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, Sudan is facing the worst food crisis in its history, with more than 755,000 people facing catastrophe in 10 out of 18 states. South Sudan peace talk is facing a stumbling block, with opposition groups demanding a newly passed bill allowing the detention of people without arrest warrants be repealed. Negotiating on the behalf of the South Sudan Opposition Movement Alliance, ANAM OK, told newsmen that it would be meaningless to sign any agreement if the National Security Act he described as draconian is signed into law. Recall that last week Parliament voted in favor of the 2015 bill, and President Salva Kiir will have the approved within 30 days for it to become law. This comes ahead of the country's first ever election on December 22, 2024. Attending the peace talks is Executive Director of the Community Empowerment for Progress organization, a non-profit that engages university students and fresh graduates. Human Rights Watch has called on President Kiir to reject the bill, saying it will further undermine human rights and threaten national security agencies that have history of rights abuses. The talks, dubbed Tumaini, a Swahili word for hope, has resulted in a draft agreement proposing to extend the country's transitional period and postpone the coming election to allow finishing up the country's constitution and electoral laws. Some Western envoys recommended delaying the polls to guarantee a free and fair election. The West African bloc ECOWAS has warned that it risks disintegration and worsen insecurity after Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formalized their breakaway union. The head of the ECOWAS Commission, Omar Toure, said the move was a major blow to the 50-year-old bloc and could have serious consequences if they do not reverse their decision. It comes after the military leader of the three countries said Saturday that they were irrevocably turning their backs on the 15-member ECOWAS to form a confederation of their own states. The junta has come into power after a series of coups between 2020 and 2023, with ECOWAS responding by imposing sanctions, demanding a quick restoration of civilian rules. ECOWAS even threatened to use military force before backing down. Some of the sanctions have been removed, and the bloc have been trying to persuade the juntas to drop their threats to leave. ECOWAS even threatened to use military force before backing down. Some of the sanctions have been removed, and the bloc have been trying to persuade the juntas to drop their threats to leave. According to a statement issued on Monday, Traoré has been tasked with taking a more vigorous approach. ECOWAS expressed disappointment with the lack of progress and promised to develop a forward-looking contingency plan. The bloc has appointed Senegalese President Bassirou Faye to mediate the crisis. His appointment was decided at an ECOWAS summit held in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Mr. Faye was touted as having the ability to serve as the facilitator in the mission predicted to face significant challenges. China's Ministry of Commerce on Wednesday launched a trade and investment barrier investigation into the relevant practices adopted by the European Union in its foreign subsidy investigations. In a statement, the Ministry of the investigation was initiated at the request of the China Chamber of Commerce for import and export of machinery and electronic products, whose qualifications and request documents have been verified. Under its foreign subsidy regulations, the EU has conducted preliminary, in-depth and wide investigations into the Chinese companies involved in sectors such as locomotives, photovoltaics, wind power, and security check equipment. The ministry said its investigation will involve surveys, hearings, and on-site activities in order to gather information from all stakeholders, while the investigation is set to conclude by January 10, 2025. It could be extended to April 10 under special circumstances. A bus crash in northern India has killed at least 18 people, including a child, in the latest deadly road accident on the country's congested highways. The collision took place early on Wednesday in Uttar Pradesh state, where the bus heading to the national capital, New Delhi, slammed into the back of the tanker carrying milk. The force of the crash threw people out of the vehicle and onto the road. Bodies were found on the ground, along the broken glass and mangled wreckage. In the addition of the 18 people killed, 19 others were injured and taken to the hospital. Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath called the accident heart-wrenching, ordering officials to ensure the injured receives proper care. State Deputy Chief Minister Pradesh Pantak told newsmen that an investigation could be conducted to determine the reasons for the accident. Prime Minister Narendra Modi relayed his condolences on social media, announcing state compensation for victims and their loved ones. Relatives of the deceased will receive $2,400, while those injured will get $600. According to analysts, road accidents are common in India, often caused by reckless driving, poor-maintained roads, and aging vehicles. Government estimates reported 168,000 deaths from such accidents in 2022. In May 2021, people were killed and more than 50 injured when the bus they were traveling in rolled down a deep gorge in Indian-administered Kashmir. You're watching Foreigndesk on Benue Television. Let's take a quick break. Stay with us. Glad to have you back. United States President Joe Biden has condemned a wave of Russian missile strike that killed at least 38 people in Ukraine as a horrified reminder of Russia's brutality as he vowed to strengthen Kyiv's air defenses. Authorities said at least 190 were injured across the country, including some at Children's Hospital in the capital, Kyiv. It comes as Mr. Biden hosted a NATO summit in Washington. The U.S. president said further boasts of Ukraine's air defenses would be announced at the meeting. Leaders from the 32 NATO member states, their partners countries, and the EU are gathering to mark the 75th anniversary of the bloc. Mr. Biden said he will be welcoming Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and other NATO leaders. The summit will focus on defense and deterrence in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The UN Security Council is also meeting at Ukraine's request. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres joined Western officials in condemning Russia's missile attack on Ukraine. Kyiv's Mayor Vitaly Klitschko declared the 9th July as a day of mourning following the deadly attack on the capital. President Zelensky has been urging Western allies to set up deliveries of air defenses for months amid the increased Russian attacks. The government in Kyiv says it desperately needs new U.S.-made Patriot air defense system, but Western officials have been reluctant to surrender any more of the limited number of surface-to-air batteries scattered across the NATO alliance. Russia has promised an early release of all Indian citizens fighting in its army. According to India's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, assurance came at the end of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Moscow, during which he raised the issue with President Vladimir Putin. Delhi has been seeking the release of Indians who say they were lured to Russia on the promise of non-combat jobs in the army, but were later forced to active combat in Ukraine. At least 4 Indians have been killed in the fighting. Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra, while speaking to newsmen, said that the Modi had strongly raised the issue of nearly discharge of Indians who had been misled into the service of Russian army. Quatra stated that there were about 35 to 50 Indians in the Russian forces, of whom 10 had already been brought home. Indians struck in the Russians said they were duped by agents with the lure of money and a Russian passports. Most of these were from poor families who were promised jobs, sometimes as helpers in the Russian army. Families of the men had appealed to Indian government for help in bringing them back home. Earlier this year, India's Ministry of Foreign Affairs urged all Indian nationals to exercise due caution and stay away from the conflicts. In March, Indian authorities said they were busted a network of agents sending people to fight for Russia under the pretext of giving them jobs. Prime Minister Modi took up the issue with President Putin during his 2-day visit to Russia, his first since 2019. A court in Moscow has issued an arrest warrant for the widow of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny on charges of extremism. The charges brought against Yulian Navalny, who lives outside Russia in absentia, are to do with her alleged participation in an extremist society. Navalny was Russia's most significant opposition leader of the past decade. He died in February in an Arctic Circle jail. Russian authorities said that he died of natural causes, but his widow said Navalny had been tortured, starved, cut off and killed by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Navalny had been serving 19 years as extremism charges that were widely seen as politically motivated. The Moscow court ruled that Navalny had been vowed to continue to work of her husband should be remanded in custody. The decision means she would face arrest if she set foot in Russia. According to analysts, the charges may be linked to a Moscow court ruling in June 2021, which outlawed 3 organizations linked to Navalny, labeling them extremists. Navalnaya was unable to attend her husband's funeral in March. She has been met to a number of Western leaders, including United States President Joe Biden. This month, she was elected to chair the U.S.-based Human Rights Foundation, a non-profit organization working to promote and protect human rights across the world. She has vowed to use the role to step up the struggle her husband fought against Russia's president. China's deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, Geng Shuang, has restated his country's call on parties to the Ukraine conflict to exercise rationality and restraints, effectively comply with international humanitarian law, and avoid attack on civilians and civilian infrastructure. In remarks at the United Nations Security Council briefing on Ukraine, Geng said that since Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, in ensuring war had led to a large number of casualties among innocent civilians and destruction of infrastructure, triggering a dire humanitarian crisis with huge spillover effects, noting that there are no winners in conflicts and confrontation, and military means will not bring lasting peace. Geng stressed that an early ceasefire and a political settlement are in the interest of all parties, and the priority to it cool down the situation by observing the three principles of no explanation of the battlefield, no escalation of fighting, and no fanning of the flames by any party. Geng maintained that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states should be respected. The purpose and the principles of the UN Charter should be adhered to. The legitimate security concern of all states should be taken seriously, and all efforts conducive to the peaceful settlement of the crisis should be supported. He added that China will continue to promote peace talks and play a constructive role in promoting political settlement of the Russian-Ukraine conflicts. We'll take more news after this break. Please stay with us. Glad to have you back on Foreigndesk. The Israeli military says it has hit Hezbollah site deep inside Lebanese territory, the latest in the volley of strikes between the two sides. In a post on Telegram on Wednesday, Israel's military said the attack targeted one of the Lebanese group's air defense system near the central village of Jenta, which is located about 79 kilometers from the capital, Beirut. This marked a deeper than usual incursion into the Lebanese territory, where most of the attacks have been confined in the south. Israel's Air Force also attacked the Hezbollah air defense site in the southern town of Barachit, and the weapon dipped into the Kafar Kila area. These parts of the strikes comes a day after Israel and Hezbollah traded fire in Syria and the Golan Heights. A Hezbollah official he spoke to newsmen said one of the victims was a former bodyguard of the group's leader Hassan Nasrallah. According to Israel police, in retaliation, Hezbollah fired rockets at the Israeli military base in the Golan Heights, killing 2 people. According to professor in conflict and humanitarian studies of Keter Foundation's Hamad bin Khalifa University, Sultan Barakat, while there had been nearly daily attacks between Hezbollah and Israelis since the start of the Gaza war. They are still part of the policy of deterrence between each other. Barakat added that Israel has demonstrated Hezbollah what it's capable of doing by attacking Gaza and Israeli minister by repeatedly threatening to do Lebanon what they have done to Gaza. With that, we've come to the end of our bulletin this afternoon. Before we go, a recap of the top stories. Ethiopian Prime Minister has sought end to conflict between Sudan's military and rapid support forces. Russia has promised to release Indians fighting in its army. We also told you that Israeli military has struck Hezbollah site deep inside Lebanese territory. Thanks for being part of Foreign Desk on Benue Television. I am Susan. Your blessed.